How does being a 305-pound nose tackle in Div 1 football prepare you for a career in storage? And what's the state of ground-up development in the space today? We're going to cover that and more on the Stories Behind the Door podcast with the Chief Executive Officer of Noble Storage, Brad Noble. I've been jonesing to get this guy on the podcast since we ran into each other out at ISS in April. It's now July when we're taping. Finally found a way to get him onto the schedule. Brad, thanks so much for setting aside some time to come and join me on the Stories Behind the Door.
Yeah, Thad, thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming. I remember when you first launched this. I guess it was a couple years ago now.
I'm coming up on 150 episodes. It's hard to believe, but it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean it's been great just seeing all the content you've been putting out. Excited to be here.
Appreciate it. Well, I always start the podcast off the same way because self-storage is such a niche industry. It's such a special industry, honestly. I love to hear the story of how people found it, how they decided to get into it. I want to hear how Bradley Noble ended up becoming a self-storage developer.
It's a long story, but I'll tell you, I was in college and I had my degree in entrepreneurship and I had to write a business plan. And it was, supposed to be, a business that you would want to do after college. And I was sitting there Googling, and I think I Googled something like how do dumb people make money or a lot of money. And I think self-storage was on there. But then I started digging into it and I was like, this asset's great. It has the lowest default rate out of any real estate asset class. It was invented by lawyers in Texas. So, at that, so all the legal stuff is very owner friendly. It has one employee, you don't have all that. So I said, this is great. Graduated, didn't have any money to do self-storage. I had to figure out how to pay my own bills. And then I started another business, which was actually selling house keys, which is a whole different story. Did that. And so then I went to my father and I said, Dad, I want to do a self-storage. And he said, all right, good, go figure it out, no partners, go. And so I went and got a piece of property under contract, had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what zoning was. I didn't know what a survey was. I didn't know what a geotech was. This first property I got under contract was a granite mountain with a stream running through it. I mean, I could not have picked a worse site. But basically what happened is my neighbor owned a construction company, and I called my neighbor and I said, Aaron, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Like, please help me. Went into his office and he showed me, how to read the survey and the geotech. And when I was talking to him, he had a hotel in his office. And I said, what's that? And he's like, this is a hotel that I own. And at that point, I had no idea that people owned hotels. I thought Marriott owned all the hotels, Hilton owned all the hotels. I had no idea that you could go build and own hotels. So I went home that night and my neighbor called me and he was like, I was thinking about it. He's like, why don't you just come develop hotels with me and I'll teach you how to develop real estate. And, if we come across self-storage, that's great. So I call that my MBA in real estate development. So I went across the country and developed low-end extended stay hotels in tertiary markets for about 2 years. And was very successful with that. I was lucky enough to open up those hotels in the middle of COVID, ended up selling them and got a great return. But basically I took all my knowledge from developing hotels and finally got to do self-storage, which was what I was trying to do years before. And so that's how I got to doing self-storage, which is kind of backwards for most people.
There's something that I take out of this, which is action. I say this frequently, action always wins, right? You go do something and yeah, sometimes it's nice if you think a little bit more before you start taking the action, but action always gets rewarded. It doesn't always necessarily get rewarded the way you thought it was when you bought it. I'm interested to know what happened to that original site. Did you ever end up doing anything on it or did it go by the wayside?
It went by the wayside. It was in Birmingham, Alabama, down the street from where I went to college. And the issue with it is it actually was, as long as there wasn't a stream or a granite mountain on it, it was actually a pretty decent self-storage site. The issue is that the owner had bought it from Walgreens. There was a Walgreens next door, and Walgreens put a bunch of deed restrictions on it, basically making it you couldn't do anything with it. But I think, that was about 8 or 9 years ago, and I think since then they have built townhouses on it. And then another self-storage group actually built one right up the street, and they're doing very successful. So I was kind of on the right path.
Hey, live and learn, right? And one thing we learn in self-storage development is you never know what's going to kill the deal, but there's always a new reason that you can find. I've been the victim of a deed restriction on a site before, so I definitely have felt that one. I want to ask a question now, mindset wise. You went to college, you studied entrepreneurship. I wish I had been smart enough when I was 18 to think that path. What was it in the makeup and the upbringing of Brad Noble that made you go out on that path? And look, just the guts and the ability to go put a site under contract and take that action. What kind of developed that mindset for you?
Definitely my upbringing. So my father is a very successful entrepreneur. He was a software guy. He had call centers back in the 80s, and then he bootstrapped a call center technology company out of that, grew it to over 500 employees, over $100 million revenue. And so he was always starting business. My dad did not go to college, could not afford college, and did that. And then my uncle was the same way. My uncle invented the Flexispout, which I don't know if you know what the Flexispout is, but it's basically the bendy straw that you put on the end of your gutter that moves the water. And so he became incredibly successful off of that one little business. So it was just really being surrounded by guys who had always owned their own business. And my dad is not a college guy. If I wasn't playing college football, he probably would have told me to skip college. You learn more doing. You learn more actually getting into the weeds than anything else.
I love that. It makes me happy to hear stories like this. All right, now I gotta go down the road. You played college football. Where'd you play? What'd you play?
I played at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, which back when I was playing, we were playing, Appalachian State, Georgia Southern, Furman, those schools. And then we were the team that, Auburn and Kentucky and Georgia would pay us $1 million to kick our ass. But it was cool because we got to go play the big boys. So we did that, and I played nose guard, and I was about 305 pounds when I was playing football. So.
Good God, you dropped some weight since then. You're not a small guy in any way, shape, or form, but you're not 305 pounds anymore by any stretch.
Yeah, being 305 pounds is really good to play football and nothing else.
I love it. Listen, I want to talk a little bit about how that experience and playing college football has helped you in your entrepreneurial career.
Oh, I mean, competitive sports, you'll learn more from competitive sports than anything else. I mean, I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for years since I was a little kid. Then I was a wrestler, and then I played football. And, I have a saying, if you're a wrestler, especially high school or college, after that, everything else in life is easy. It teaches you to show up on time, to be organized, to be accountable, to have delayed satisfaction towards a goal, which is what people don't understand is, especially football. There's no other sport that you have to practice as much to have as little games, to have this, to have the success. So, I attribute a lot of my success to playing competitive sports because it teaches you how to do the simple things that are the most important things, like showing up on time, having a good attitude, doing shit when you're tired. There's so many, so many people that they're like, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm gonna have a mental health day and just go home today. It's like, no, there's none of that shit when you're playing football or wrestling, and it's the same thing in business.
Yeah.
If you're gonna, be tired and let how you feel dictate what you're going to do, then you're not going to be successful.
I love that mindset. I spent a bunch of my adult life teaching mixed martial arts and doing a lot of jiu-jitsu. So I love that and you're right. There's nothing prepares you better for being in the arena even as a nose tackle. You might be 1 or 2 or 1 on 2 or 1 on 3 sometimes, depending on how the offensive line's blocking, but nothing prepares you better for life than that getting in the arena and being by yourself. I want to transition a little bit. I know you're based out of the Atlanta area. You've done a lot of your self-storage developments in that area. We've talked about a few sites over the years in your backyard. I want to talk about the changes from when you first got into self-storage, which is not a super long time ago. It's been a few years now, to 2025, and kind of what your outlook is on how self-storage development is right now. What is it like trying to go out and find sites that make sense from a development standpoint?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that it's incredibly hard. You know, it's I would say the biggest difference that I've seen is I guess a lot of developers on groups have not read Sam Zell's book. Am I being too subtle? Sam Zell had it in his office, written across his wall: supply and demand. When I first
Yeah.
got into this business, and you found a good site, you would go plant your flag. You would say self storage coming soon. You would put it on Yardi. You would put it on Radius. You'd put it on these things, and people would stay the hell away from you. It seems like when we had this rush, people just decided that supply and demand was not a thing, and so the biggest thing there is finding sites not only that pencil today, but that have moats around them. Everything that I'm looking to develop now has to be very difficult. If it's a fully entitled site somewhere and there's 10 other fully entitled sites around there, I don't want it because you'll never do it. Everything I'm doing is a 2-year process. It's a hard rezone. It is, a special land use permit, or it's a mixed use. Like, it's a very difficult site. And I would say that's the biggest difference there. And then take that out of the equation. Right now, self-storage rates are depressed, I think on average 25% across the country. And so that makes it even more difficult. And I think right now we are at the bottom, knock on wood. And I think once, everything settles out, we will be able to, raise rents, and there'll be a lot more opportunities right now. But I would say that's the biggest difference from when I started to now.
I just saw some data from Tyson Hubner yesterday. The June data came back, and June rates were up year over year. Not a ton, 0.5% broadly, but that was the second month in a row that we've started to see year over year rate growth, actually more than the second month in a row. It's been going since January. So to your point of knocking on wood, hopefully we've turned that corner in the rate situation. That being said, to your point, the dip was not unsubstantial from what we were seeing in 21, 22. There's still some recovery to go for people. I'd like to ask a little bit about the underwriting from 2021, 22, those projects that you start developing, early on in COVID, not foreseeing interest rates going sky high, not necessarily seeing a depression in rates. How do you keep those development projects on pace and keep them coming out of the ground in a way that's going to long term still be profitable, given the myriad of changes that have happened in the last couple of years on a few levers that are really important to the ultimate economic stability of a project?
So I will say, back in the heyday when we had COVID rates and money was free, I kept my bar up here. I never dipped my bar for anything. I told everyone at my company, I want to be Apple, not Samsung. I want to have the most profitable self-storage company, right? So I never let my bar get lowered. So, all the deals that I was doing were what I would consider grand slam home runs. And so they were up here, and then we have, interest rate spikes, we have construction costs going up, we have all these things. And so, yeah, they're not the grand slam home runs on the park, but they're still a good deal. And we're able to survive now. I would say everything I have that is developed right now is penciling at what other guys were penciling their deals at in COVID when money was free. And that was the thing. And it was, and don't get me wrong, I almost fell into the trap. I could have 50 self-storages right now open if I didn't keep my bar that high. And I was kicking myself all through COVID. I was like, I should do more deals. This one looks good. And thankfully, I have a good sounding board around me, and I got talked out of doing a few not home run deals. And so I think that keeping your buy elevated is what saved me right now.
I love that idea. A couple things I want to touch on. You talked earlier about football and delayed gratification, and then you talked about making the conscious choice now in your development company to really go after deals that are have that moat around them. Well, the reality of a deal with a moat around them is, you're adding a pretty significant chunk of time to when you're going to see the payoff. How do you keep the mental discipline to say, hey, yeah, this is going to be a 2 year entitlement period, but it's worth it?
You know, Sam Zell has supply and demand written on his wall. Mine says aggressive patience is what mine says.
Love it.
It's gonna,
Love it.
it's just, it's tough. You got to have the small wins. You got to get the snowball going down the hill. But, I don't know any other way, and it reminds me of, the guy who asked Warren Buffett. It's like, nothing you're doing is crazy. Why doesn't everyone just do what you do? And Warren Buffett said, because no one wants to get rich slow. That's the whole thing. So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it's just,
It
I think it's the best way to do it. I'd rather have delayed satisfaction later on and it'd be a home run deal than me being the red on a deal because it was easy and I was able to rush through it.
It's so interesting you said that. One of my favorite quotes I've ever had on the podcast was from Mitch Feldman a year and a half ago, and he said, "Hey, you know, everyone sees me now in 2023, 24, 25, and they're like, hey, he's doing so well. They didn't see me in 2002 when I was knocking on doors begging for people to support me, and in 2008, 2010, 2012, 2015 when it was a massive struggle." And he finished that by saying, real estate is a get rich slow game, right? It works, but you get rich slow. And you and I are going to watch this together play out over the next couple of years, but I'm very interested to see how many people that treated it like, especially self-storage, because we know what it was like in 21, 22, 23, even into 23, it's still a little bit of that momentum was there. People were starting to think of it as a get rich fast game. And are there going to be people that really get burned because of decisions that they made in 21, 22? I'm going to pivot now a little bit because one of the reasons that I got so excited to have you come on, most people that watch the podcast know I'm deep down the rabbit hole on this small bay industrial flex thing. This is something you and I have talked about a lot. I'm interested to get your take. I certainly know why I went down this rabbit hole. I'm interested to know what brought Brad Noble into the small bay flex world. You're out there on LinkedIn very clearly talking about your desire to acquire and develop these projects. What about that asset class drew you in?
I've always been interested in it. Flex is kind of the little brother, if you will, to self-storage, or the big brother, depending on who you're talking to. And I remember I actually posted on LinkedIn 2 years ago, who's my Flex warehouse expert? And then I got some contacts, but then I think I was developing 17 self-storages at that point. So you can only date so many girls at one time. So that kind of took the back burner. And so it kind of got brought up because I bought a piece of land down in Florida for a self-storage, and I was having to fight with the city over water. They wanted me to pay $2 million to go tie into water. And then it kind of popped in my head. I was like, why don't we do a flex warehouse? Because the rules were different, that I wouldn't have to go pay the $2 million to tap into the water. And I ran the pro forma and I was like, oh, this actually works better than the self-storage right here. And so then I dug into it a little bit more, and it's a lot of the same thing. As far as development, you're looking for a lot of the similar zoning. It's a lot of the same subcontractors, a lot of the same general contractors. So as far as pivoting, it was a lot easier to pivot from self-storage to flex as it would, say, if I wanted to pivot from self-storage to multifamily or self-storage to some other asset class. So I think that was the thing. It was kind of a necessity. I've owned this piece of land for 3 years, and it was kind of one of those things I needed to figure out something to do with it. And I'm lucky that it's good for flex warehouse.
That adaptability, that you talked about jujitsu and wrestling, right? You find yourself in positions where you got to figure something out, and you go and figure it out for sure. I'm interested to know, as you've dove deeper into that asset class, you talked a little bit about the similarities to storage and how it kind of, especially zoning, you're looking for similar areas, and subs, which is a big thing, right? The contractors you're going to use tend to be able to steel building in many cases. You're going to use a lot of the same people you'd use to build a storage. Anything else about the asset class that's attracted you to it that maybe is a little different than storage as you started to dive into it more?
I really, when I'm looking at a business to invest in, whether it's real estate or anything like that, I'm looking at, what can disrupt it, right? And what does it go through recession cycles and especially with, AI coming out, right? And what is, the businesses that are AI proof that aren't going to get disrupted by AI and Amazon, or might actually be helped by that. And it's your tenants that are in small bay flex. It's your pool guy, it's your granite companies, it is your carpenters, it is, all these blue collar type businesses that aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And I really like that aspect. And there's always going to be a healthy demand, whether or not we're in a bull market or a bear market. And I think that's what I liked about it the most versus some other asset classes.
You know what? That's interesting. I haven't ever thought about flex. I've thought about a lot about flex over the last year and a half, but I never had that thought about it. So I'm glad I asked the question. How many projects you have going on right now? How deeply into this rabbit hole are you?
We're talking about Flex Warehouse.
About flex? Yeah, I know you were doing 17 storage facilities a couple years ago, but how much of this have you really kind of driven into?
Oh, we're real deep into it. I basically decided about 2 or 3 months ago that we were going to allocate a good bit of our resources on this, and there were some learning curves. We had to build out a new model. We had to learn the things we didn't know about it. But I think right now we are looking about 300 new opportunities a week. And from that 300, I think we're sending out about 8 LOIs a week, either on existing facilities or development sites. Right now, we have one development site, the one I talked about, and one flex warehouse under contract right now. And we're negotiating 2 PSAs with 2 other flex warehouses right now. So we're running and gunning right now.
I think, a lot of people don't understand what it takes to really be successful. And you're dropping numbers right now that are not easy to achieve, right? Looking at 300 sites in a week. By the way, that's hard for one person to do, right? Like it's hard, one person fully dedicated to just looking at sites to identify 300 in a week and to send out 8 LOIs. That's a whole nother person's workload for the week. I'm interested to know your philosophy and I've met your team. Like I've been at trade shows and see you're not a one-man show. You've got a group of great guys around you. How did you set that bar with your hiring and creating a team that's able to have that kind of work output?
Very lucky. I'll say right now that I have the best team in all of real estate. Everyone who's on my team is an A player, and I, I hate to keep referring back to books and quotes, but
Please do.
Steve Jobs, he's like, we only hire A players. We don't hire B players because the B players will hire the C players, and then you have a bunch of C players. And when we hired our newest analyst, me and my senior analyst, I think we interviewed 50 candidates. And Ben at my office hated me because I just kept saying no to every single one. And it was just, having the high bar. It's the same thing when we're looking at self-storage sites or flex warehouse sites. Same thing with hiring. You don't lower your bar just to check a box. And I think that was the big difference there.
I was having this conversation with somebody earlier today, this concept of one, knowing where you're going, right? What's your goal? What are you trying to achieve? But then having the guardrails, right? What are the things that you're not gonna deviate from? What are the principles that you're gonna follow? And I'll say this, and I probably told you this in person, super impressed with what you've done. What you're saying doesn't surprise me at all in hindsight, having seen the success you've had, that you're very clear on what's driving the decisions that you're making, right? You have a very clear standard of, hey, we're going to set the bar and we're not going to deviate from that bar. Going back to one of the very first things you said, which was delayed gratification and being okay, right? Hey, if I got to interview 50 people to get the right person, is that going to be worth it in the long run versus, hey, if I just hire someone quickly, how much more time am I going to waste having to A, maybe not get the performance that I wanted, B, have to let that person go and then go through the process again? Doesn't surprise me given what you've been able to do that you have that much of a driving mission and understanding of what you're trying to set about. Love hearing that type of thing. I'll go back to what I asked before. How do you get so convicted about having those principles in place?
How do I get so convicted about having the principles in place? Uh, I'm not sure I really understand your question, right? The standard
I,
is
I'll
standard.
and look, you say that, and I think one of the reasons you might not understand it is because you're living it, and maybe most people don't. I mean, I think that's been
Well,
my
well,
general.
if you're asking why I'm sticking to the standard on how we're doing stuff, I think it all has to do with what we're trying to do and what our goal. My goal is to have the best and most profitable business that I can have, right? And my
Love it.
business is 100% reliant on the assets that we buy and build to be successful. We're not a fund, right? And so there's no other, I'm not doing this for a fee, right? It's not that I raised $1 billion and I have to get out this $1 billion or my investors are going to be mad at me and all that. And so I think, the ability to have patient capital, I think helps with our decision makings here and to make sure that we have those guardrails up and that we're doing everything correctly. Does
I
that make
love
sense?
that. I guess my where I was trying to go, and you may have sort of answered that with this idea of patient capital is, how does Brad Noble, in my eyes, man, I'm 51 years old. I still look at you and I'm like, you're a super young guy. And to have that understanding and what I would call business maturity at your age, I wish I'd had an ounce of that understanding of, what are the real keys to success? When you see a really successful business, no matter what it is, whether it's Apple, whether it's Amazon, a couple companies you've mentioned, they had a very clear vision of what they were going after, and they had very clear principles on how they were going to go after it. So to see you at such a young age and know that you're running your business with those principles, I always wonder where that came from. How did somebody get exposed to that at such a young age to keep the standard the standard? Because look, you and I both know it gets very easy to start slipping a little bit on the standard, right? It's not hard to start. Hey, I'm waking up 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later this morning. All of a sudden, we're waking up 10 minutes earlier. I love to know how you have been surrounded or what it is that motivated you to be able to stay so consistent on holding such a high standard.
You, you know, I think it has to go back to competitive sports. My coaches were all old Alabama coaches for the most part, especially my strength coach. And it was all about we have one standard, right? And we're going to stick to this every single day. We're going to do it day in and day out, and we're not gonna it doesn't matter how we feel, it doesn't matter what else is going on, and we're just gonna do it. So I think it has to go back to competitive sports, and honestly, the mentorship from Jim, who's my father, having him involved the whole way, because when he ran his company, it was the exact same discipline throughout that.
I love it. Well, listen, like you don't have enough going on your plate with storage and with Small Bay Flex. I'm at ISS and I'm walking around the trade show booth, and all of a sudden I'm seeing Noble Insurance. And I'm like, where did this come from? You decided to go out and start a whole nother venture. Interested to know what got you into the insurance game and why you decided to go down that road and start a whole nother business.
Yeah, well, it was really a necessity, right? So I owned a bunch of self storages down in Florida and Georgia, and the hurricanes came, and all of a sudden, my insurance rate either doubled or tripled, or I had some insurance providers say, "We're just not going to insure you." And I just figured there has to be a better way. So we started this about over a year ago. It's taken us over a year to get all the processes in place. So we started our own insurance company. It's Noble Insured, and we are primarily focusing just on self-storage assets across the country with a focus on Florida, because I'm a self-storage owner. I had two self-storages get directly hit by the hurricanes every time they come through, and so I understand the risk there, right? I'm okay with that risk. You know what? The problem that's happened in the insurance business is they've painted with a very broad brush. You know, they're counting a wood shack on the beach the same as a steel reinforced self storage, 10 miles inland in Florida. It just doesn't make any sense. And so, that was the opportunity. And so, we're A-rated paper, licensed in all 50 states, and I'm excited for this. I really am. I think it's a great opportunity, and just talking to the people I know in self storage, I mean, they were all feeling the hurt, and if I can help them with their insurance costs, it's a win-win.
I love it. If somebody wants to get a hold of you guys to talk about the insurance side of it, how do they do that? What's the easiest way for them to get in touch with Noble Insured?
So you can go to our website, nobleinsured.com, and there's a contact us on there. That's a good way. Or, happy to reach out to me directly. Be noble at noblemail.com. Happy to take care of you there as well.
I love it. We'll have all that stuff rolled across the bottom so they're quick links and easy access for people. I certainly know how to get a hold of Brad quickly, so if you have any trouble getting a hold of him, don't be afraid to reach out to me. You're all over LinkedIn all the time. Love watching what you got going on. As I said, from afar, somebody that's got a lot more gray in their beard, I'm looking forward to seeing what the next 20 years hold for you, the way you carry yourself and what you built. Really blessed that you were willing to come on and share the story with me for a half hour. Can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Thad. It was fun.
Absolute pleasure. We'll try and circle up a little while down the road and see if we can't talk a little bit more when you get some of those flex projects opened up. He's Brad Noble, developer of self-storage and small bay industrial flex. Just started Noble Insured, so don't be afraid to reach out to him, especially been affected by some of the weather events that have been going on lately with your insurance. I'm Thaddeus Campbell. That's it for this week's edition of the Stories Behind the Door podcast. We look forward to seeing everybody next week.